Okay, happy Easter Monday, and welcome to another episode of Storm the Culture's Literature for Fifth Generation Warriors. Um, if you are someone who enjoys spending your Christmases with the McLeans at Nakatomi Plaza, then I think I can convince you to spend your Easters with Dutch and the Predator. Stay with me and you'll understand why. So, for those of you who aren't familiar, fifth generation warfare is, there's lots of definitions for it, and the shiny brassy people can argue about it all they want, but essentially it's this state has lost its monopoly on war, and all the toys have gotten into the hands of people who are using them theoretically for good, but for their own war. They're in the hands of criminals, of corporations, third world countries. Essentially, it's a free-for-all. It's war all the time. You don't see it, but it's constantly going on. It's cybernetic. It's psychotronic. It's torture. It's endless. We're all combatants all the time, and we're all prisoners of war all the time. And if that wasn't depressing enough, I suggest you watch a movie, because at this point, who cares? So it's better than being goaded into a civil war. So Die Hard came out in 88. Predator came out in 87. And I'm not talking about The Predator. I'm talking about Predator. So Predator came out in 87, and they're both directed by John McTiernan. They're both classics. If my mother could hear me now say that Predator and Die Hard were classics, this is why we didn't get along so well. Anyways, the Central Intelligence Agency had been mucking about in South America, conducting coups and overthrowing governments for a long time. So the premise is hardly far-fetched. The premise is that a former commando gone CIA agent is trying to enlist the best team that he knows in order to go into South America and find a lost helicopter that contained a cabinet minister and his aide. And the best team is led by Dutch, who's played by Arnold Schwarzenegger. The CIA agent is played by Carl Weathers. You'll remember him from Rocky. And in the opening scenes, there's, of course, the all too lacking briefing. And Arnold and the character's name is Dylan, that's played by Carl Weathers. And so Dutch and Dylan arm wrestle. And so we know right away that if Arnold's the good guy, Carl Weathers loses, of course. So we know to keep our eyes peeled, and that not everything is not as it seems. So prior to that, in the very opening of the movie, almost to be missed, it's almost like it happens before the movie even starts. You might think it's like movie house, and you don't even know that the movie has started yet. There is a spaceship that crosses the screen and drops its super soldier Lizard onto Earth in a blaze of orangey red. So the here's my opinion, and I'm sticking to it. If there's a lot of fear generated by aliens, it's very unknown. Some people are into it and they think, oh, how arrogant that we're not, for us to think we're the only ones in the universe. The military uses UFOs and aliens to keep you in fear so that you don't ask exactly what the hell they're doing with our good name, our money, and with our men. So I'm sticking to it. All the way back from Orson Welles with reading War of the Worlds on the radio or an adapted screenplay of World of the Wars and how terrified people were. A fearful populace is much more easily led, and they have used UFOs on us, and aliens. Unidentified flying objects are simply experimental aircraft in the first place. In the second place, there's plenty of explanations for any alien life form. You just, you have to do your homework and it's there. But anyways, moving on from that. So we see some sideways glances from Carl Weathers to the general. Now we know from the general that Dutch has obtained the rank of major, so we know he was a former, I doubt he, soldier, but more likely special forces or special operations. And one of the warmest and funnest scenes of the movie is the guys on the helicopter as they're flying into this South American country. It's all red lit. You've got little Richard in the background singing about Long Tall Sally, and the guys are all, teasing each other, and their characters are coming out, and we're getting introduced to each character. And we do learn through the stereotypical lighter that both Dutch and Dylan were north of Way. So we know that they were Vietnam veterans and that they served together, and I'm not sure what north of Way meant, but it's interesting to me that Blaine, who is a member of Dutch's team, played by Jesse Ventura, spits his chew on Dylan's boot. Like, I don't care who you are. I don't care that you served with Dutch. Something about you is amiss. So there's two indications now, two foreshadowings now, that this Dylan character is not being upfront with the team. So let's see. We have, as I've mentioned, we have Jesse Ventura. His character's name is Blaine. He's best friends with Mac, who's played by Bill Duke. And so you have, in that relationship, you have the quintessential black man, white man relationship where they pull together to execute the mission. Like Mac is always sharing his flask with Blaine. Blaine is very blustery and rough talking with the team, but in private with Mac, he's much more honest and low key, and that's a really interesting dynamic that you just you gloss over or wouldn't even notice the first time you watched it. But he's really himself. He's much more honest with Mac. So it's a nice little dynamic. Then you have, let me just make sure I get their names. Richard Chavez plays Billy, and Richard Chavez plays Poncho. Sonny Landham plays Billy, and Shane Black plays Hawkins. So you got the Hispanic, Native American, and dirty joke telling awkward white guy roles filled there. And isn't that what America is all about. People from all different places and backgrounds and cultures contributing their best skills to the effort. So the Army has been at the forefront of segregation and racism, surely in its history, throughout its history. However, it was also on the forefront of desegregation far prior to society at large, which is an interesting parallel to think about today because of the transgender push within the military. Transgenderism is a precursor to transhumanism. You have to not care about male and female. You can't have humans control reproduction if you want transhumanism. The elite decide who can breed. The elite decide who can, what characteristics those offspring will have, and transgenderism is the on-ramp because of our very good-natured desire to want to accept everybody, and personal freedom and autonomy is so paramount to our culture that we'll do anything to protect that, including laying down our lives. But it's being used against us. And that's nothing against true transgendered. It's against the ideology of pushing children into transgenderism so that we have a generation that cannot reproduce. Which is probably where the pornography comes in, because so much of it will condition your brain to be unable to deal with the messiness of a real relationship, whether it's the emotional aspect of it, the awkwardness of it, or trying to fit in. It's so much easier, one thinks, to just participate in pornography, but that's an on-ramp to us not having control of our own reproduction. So I say embrace men, embrace womanhood, and that's how God made us, and he had it figured out. So a little note about this team. In the briefing, Dylan asks Dutch why he didn't take the mission in Libya. This would be Libya during the Gaddafi days, and if you lived through that, you would be like, okay. So Dutch says, "We're not assassins. We're a rescue team, or we're a rescue team, not assassins." And so Dylan takes that in. He specifically asked him that question to find out what his answer was. And once he got his answer, he knew how he was going to conduct the rest of that briefing. So in the movie, we can assume that as independents and with the ability to choose one's own assignments, that he's an independent contractor, as we would say today, in the niceties of what are we in, the 20, I don't know what century we're in anymore. He would be a contractor because it sounds so nice. He was a mercenary, and a rescue mercenary, so more Delta oriented than well, in the original intent of Delta, which was for like confronting terrorists and rescuing of hostages. Someone said they could be more blue lightish. Blue light was set up as a stopgap measure because it was going to take 2 years to set up Delta. And blue light was the special forces version of Delta. And of course, those that was an attempt to steal Delta, or to overtake Delta, or to have blue light be better than Delta, and have the need for Delta be eradicated. It didn't last. It went away as soon as Delta was stood up. So it was a military rivalry, I swear. It was an attempt to knock Delta out of the picture, and Delta, God love Charlie Beckwith, he got it stood up. So we can assume that because Dutch turns down that Libya assignment, that he's working independently, and this time he's working for the United States. So the General Phillips is played by R.G. Armstrong, and that's how we learn, as I said, that Dutch is a major. The men air assault in. They find the helicopter. It's in the trees, which is always, that did indeed happen in Vietnam, and it's kind of spooky to see a helicopter crashed into trees. It's there's something spooky about it. But it's even more spooky when out comes the grappling hooks. all these nowadays what would be considered primitive skill sets, but the grappling hooks come up and the guys get up into the plane, and there is a pilot, or at least we see one pilot. I don't know if we see both or not, I can't remember, but there's at least one pilot, and he's still strapped into the seat, and he's hanging upside down. Hanging upside down is never a good thing. Obviously I'm stating the obvious, but there's also an instant correlation to saints who are crucified upside down. It's the inversion of man, and so whenever you have that upside down death, it is the inversion of man's and life. It comes from the other. So very interesting in that scene. Poncho is the one that goes up or is one of the people that goes up into the plane to see what the deal is, and he reports back to Dutch that the plane is not just a plane; it's a reconnaissance plane. He refers to it as a surveillance plane, and so that kind of gives us a clue that they know what's going on in this area, and they had been surveilling it in the first place. So, and there's more to that, but we don't know that yet. So Billy, of course, being the Native American, is the one that's good at tracking, of course. And he says that there's a bunch of men wearing U.S. Army issued boots trailing the guerrillas who have taken the passengers, the quote-unquote cabinet minister and his aide, to the guerrilla camp. And there are these men who are following them, who are wearing Army issue boots. And very shortly thereafter, we find some of these men strung up in trees, upside down, disemboweled and skinned. And Dutch says alive. So, all right, whether they were skinned alive or not, I think we can tell that because they're so bloody. It's an interesting development for sure. And then they find the dog tags of one of the men who's hung up. And again, the upside down thing. So now this is the second time that we've seen something hung upside down, and a man hung upside down. And the dog tag reveals that the man is a Green Beret. One of the men is a Green Beret known to Dutch from Fort Bragg. So, okay. When Dylan is confronted with this fact, he's like, well, this is unhuman or inhuman, and I had no idea that there were Green Berets down here. And Dutch calls him out and says, well, somebody sent them, right? Somebody sent the Green Berets. And why wouldn't the CIA know that? So on we go. Interestingly enough, though, I was mired in Leviticus when I rewatched this. And if you've ever slogged through that book, the first part of the book is nothing but instructions on how to sacrifice animals so that your offering is pleasing to the Lord. And in a few instances, there are statements that are the exclamation point on it is the phrase, I am God. And the two in particular that came out for me was, don't sacrifice your children, I am God. And don't drink blood, I am God. Now, I didn't jot down the chapter and verse, but that, feel free to slog your way through Leviticus and find these verses for yourself. But this plays out even stronger later. It was just odd that I ended up reading that at the same time that I rewatched this, and it was very apropos. So there's an action-packed raid on the guerrilla camp. Lots of things to learn there. We learn that there is one hostage that's shot, and we witnessed that on screen with Dutch. And after the raid is completed, we find out that the other hostage is also dead. However, we find out that there is no way on earth that these men are who they've been told that they were, that they're CIA agents. So the helicopter was full of CIA agents, and it was a surveillance plane. After the raid on the guerrilla camp, which is quite exciting, there's all kinds of crap going on, and Arnold is picking up trucks and rolling them down hills, and there's lots of demolition. And at one point, Poncho says to Blaine, "You're bleeding, man," and he goes, "I don't have time to bleed." And it used to be in my naivete that I thought that Delta operators could just lower their blood pressure enough, that they were such, like Zen warriors, that they could lower their blood pressure enough to stop their own bleeding. But I'm sure it's much more complex than that. Annie Jacobson, who is a CIA hangout for sure, but still a great entry point for the public, the general public, wrote an article in, I believe it was The Atlantic, about super soldier technology. And one of the things that she wrote about was the concept of the soldiers taking in microscopic magnetic pieces and what could possibly go wrong, and waving, and like if you were wounded in the arm, waving the wand over your wound, and all of those metallic magnetic pieces would congregate at the wound. And I don't know, Predator should have this. Predator should have this technology. But, I'm sure when the guys go in for an MRI or airport security that things go drastically awry. Anyways, I know it's not a thing, but there are certainly other things that the general public doesn't know about, that Delta is capable of such things. And there are plenty of super soldier experiments and telepathic communication on the battlefield, manipulation of the brain to lean, move left, move right. There's, tapping into the part of the brain that regulates sleep, food, like being able to remotely monitor their health. Are they dehydrated? Are they, sleepy? Like zapping their brain a little bit to get them to wake up or be more alert in a certain circumstance. So, anyways, it was just a funny line that he didn't have time to bleed. And of course, Poncho launches he has a grenade launcher, I think, and he launches a few grenades and says, "Well, do you have time to duck?" And just the interjected humor in the middle of chaos. We also pick up our female lead here, our only female lead. Her name is Anna. She's played by, I hope I can pronounce this right, but I doubt I can, Elpidia Carrillo. And at some point she's, for the most part, she's wearing a button-down shirt and like a hat, and but then at one point all of a sudden she's in a sweaty, dirty tank top. But she has Sarah Connor to live up to, and that's another movie for another day, but that's the era we're talking about. So whether it's a nod to the Sarah Connor character, or hey, we have to have a female somewhere in the movie. She can run through the jungle, man. She can seriously hoof it through the jungle and bring the guys way off course. And she throws some dirt, she hucks some logs at some heads, like she's pretty tough. She hangs in there. Couple of things though, she does put her fingers in Predator's blood on a leaf and rubs it on her pants. So also she's not carrying a weapon of any kind. So according to Dutch, that would mean that she wasn't, Predator wouldn't go after her because there's no sport in it. Let's see. So Mac is the first one who actually sees the outline of the Predator. The Predator is a chameleon that is able to blend into any environment, any background. He's completely invisible. And for the movie's purposes, we see his outline so that we, the viewer, knows where he is. And Mac is the first one to see what we see. And like predators in real life, they just blend into their environment and you never do see them. So touche to the screenwriters and the director of that, because that's how it is in real life, isn't it? So I think it's important that we have Mac be the first one to see predators outlined, because the black community, obviously, I'm not talking about slavery, but in the 20th century, perhaps more quickly than the majority of the population, they saw, for instance, the Tuskegee syphilis studies, or experimentation on prisoners. Not that whites weren't involved in that, they were, but often as control groups versus the black men who were experimented on, especially for topical poisons and chemicals. Agent Orange, for example, was tested on inmates in a Pennsylvania penitentiary in that way. COINTELPRO, for example, the writing letters to Martin Luther King to encourage him to commit suicide. I think, that's pretty demonic. So I think it's a nice note that Mac is the character that sees him first. So then we have Anna telling us that the predator has harassed the good people of that area for a long time, and that the elders call him the devil. The creature, of course, is, when he's glitching out, we see that he's a Rastafarian-esque lizard, giant lizard, and that finally, when we get to see him take off his mask, which is like hermetically sealed, and he does this little and removes his mask, Dutch says, "You are one of the ugly bleepity bleep," and it's a good line, along with a line at the guerrilla camp action scene where he takes this enormous buoy and sticks some combatant to a wall or a tree with this knife and says, "Stick around." So I wonder where this, our evil reptilian overlords came in, that phraseology came into our, our culture. Is it that the reptilian part of our brains keep circling around the mountain with the emotions of our childhood, and we keep repeating the same patterns in our lives until we break free of it, type of thing? Is it because the few rich bankers and business owners, politicians, although politicians don't even have a say anymore, are those elite of the elite, is it the cold-bloodedness, the cruelty, the venomous aspect of it, the is that where that phrase comes to? Because I'm pretty sure we don't have alien, lizards from outer space coming down here. I do think that is again, another psyop that is used to scare the American public, and they're doing a bang-up job of it. Psyop deserves a Oscar. So at one point, Poncho, he's getting that, I get a bad feeling. He says to Dutch, "Remember Afghanistan?" And Dutch says, "I'm trying to forget." And it's so interesting that, okay, obviously they were participants as mercs in the Soviet-Afghan war. But now that America has been to the place where empires go to die, it's odd to hear that in the middle of the movie. Like, what are they saying about Afghanistan? And it's just an interesting little exchange. So, spoiler alert, everyone's killed but Dutch. So, now, a little bit about the technology of Predator. A lot about it. Okay, he can go through fire. He can triangulate. We see it's very rudimentally shown to us compared to our technology nowadays that we see in movies. But we can see that when Dutch throws a stone as a diversion, Predator can do this little triangulation thing in order to shoot. We see that, meanwhile, while he has all this technology, he's got a shoulder-mounted firearm. He's got the ability to administer first aid to himself. Meanwhile, Dutch is continually going more primitive and using his primitive skills and his ability to adapt and overcome, his creativity to defeat the monster. Now, obviously, we know nowadays that the Predator can see by thermal imaging, and Dutch defeats it with mud, although he doesn't realize it at the time. He figures it out, and of course, because now we know it. Now watching it, that's something that probably doesn't hold up to what we know about modern technology. But he says, he can't see me. Like he figures it out, and he has to say that part out loud because the audience might not figure that out. So he's crafting bows and arrows for himself and deadfall traps, and at one point he hits Predator with an arrow, and Predator screams out and opens up his little his Sunday afternoon quarterback control panel and opens up his first aid kit and is able to administer to himself first aid. Like, he can staple his wound back together. He has this gun that can probably administer whatever he needs to heal his wound, like an antibiotic or whatever. And you can see how, okay, this is 87. Okay, where has this super soldier technology gone from now? I mean, this guy can walk through fire. He's got an exoskeleton. They're always talking about exoskeletons for super soldiers today, and how that would monitor health and telepathic communication and zapping the brain and veer left and veer right and so Dutch lures Predator under his trap, and he makes this giant deadfall, and the deadfall kills him, essentially, but he doesn't quite die. And Dutch picks up a rock and is going to smash his head in order to finish the job, and he doesn't, because he's a human being and he's righteous, and he drops the rock. Mistake. You always want to, the coup de grace is very important. Never stop fighting until they're actually dead. You need to know this. Movies have taught us anything. It's kill them, bleepity bleep. So as he's spitting up green blood, or green blood's coming from his forehead or whatever, he again pulls out his Sunday afternoon quarterback wrist control panel and detonates his own self-destruction. And the self-destruction starts out as an electrical storm, hint, hint, like wild electrical storm, like lightning bolts going in all different directions. And then it morphs into an atomic bomb. So in his last act of malice, the Predator is going to kill Dutch and destroy the environment. Dutch escapes the blast. He gets on the helicopter, but he's lost all his friends, and the girl Anna has made it to the helicopter as well. And I guess that's why we needed to see that she was really good at running through the jungle earlier, because now we know that it's believable that she could make it to the helicopter by herself. And they pick up Dutch, and you can see the world weariness now in his eyes. He's not so naive. He has learned, so I'm going to backtrack a little bit to fill in so that I can bring you to my finale, is that, of course he learned that Dylan was lying to him. And Dylan told him, yes, that, he was expendable. And Dutch says, my men are not expendable, and I don't do this kind of work. And, he's resentful that he was dropped into a meat grinder. I so wish that more special operations and special forces men would see what they've been dropped into, or rather what the American public has been dropped into, because we could sure use some could sure use some hostage rescue. Dylan does redeem himself by going after Mac. So we do have the two black characters in the movie pairing up together and going off to face the monster by themselves. We do have Billy as a Native American, sort of doing his death song to the Predator, giving himself to Predator. Poncho almost makes it, but doesn't. But there is, so in the helicopter scene, we can only hope that, we don't know if there's any love interest there or not. But at least it opens the door that, or rather it's symbolic of man and woman going forward into life as man and woman. And there has to be enough pressure applied to the corruption in this country by both man and woman, but woman can't do it by herself, and man can't abdicate his position of authority. It's going to take the two of them to go forward into this new world, and they both have their eyes open, and they both know how bad it is. But I'd like you to go back and watch the fight scene between Dutch and Predator. At this, there's one point where we see Predator take off his mask, and he's wading through water, and we see that he essentially has what looks like to us modern day ankle bracelets on his legs, which indicates to us that he too is a prisoner. He is also imprisoned by this system, and he's in mono a lizardo. I don't know how you would say that, reptilian. they're in a man-to-man fight, and he takes off all of his modern technology. He takes off his helmet, he takes off his shoulder weapon, he takes off everything that gives them an advantage, and they have fisticuffs, essentially. And Dutch is getting the ever-living crap beaten out of him. Now, go back and watch that. And I guarantee you, you'll never get the sound out of your head again. Because what Predator hears, what we hear from Predator, from his point of view, is a child struggling. Go back and listen. I watched it a million times. Go back and listen. What we hear is the little boy inside Dutch, or I don't want to say inner child. I want to say something deeper than that. In the Bible, when God says, do not sacrifice your children, I am God, we often think of throwing virgins into a volcano, and as tragic as that is, the quintessential sacrifice is an unblemished male. Like Jesus is the unblemished male, the first issue, and the first child, the first male, unblemished. And so we have this very good, upright, ethical, he's not an assassin, very good man, probably terrified of what he's having to face. And all you hear is, from Predator's point of view, is a child struggling. It's a child's voice. So that tells us that Predator can monitor emotions. Now, that was 87. Emotions is child's play to today's AI and technology. Spooling up thoughts is absolutely positively what's going on. The fact that you don't say anything to anybody, you simply think about something that you want to do, a place you want to go, or something you want to buy, and it's in your feed. Well, that can be done for a whole host of reasons, good and bad. I would propose that even good people who monitor your prayers to God are no good. Jesus doesn't arm twist. Jesus doesn't force. He's a gentleman. So, that being said, go back and watch that. I would say to you that it is time that it's hard for me to say, because I so look up to my heroes in the service, but we have to stop sacrificing our men to the meat grinder, and that's exactly what that is saying. So the other thing that you should go back and look at is at one point where a Predator is repairing, giving himself first aid. There's a crow in the scene. It's like a subliminal flash of a crow in the scene. And I'm like, that can't possibly be there. So I watched it on my computer, and then I went and watched it in the movie again, and it's there. And I'm like, oh, well, I'll be. Isn't that interesting? So, happy Easter. God bless. Take care of your mind, and see you next time.